Welcome everyone. This is the next session of training on the Nurture Principles. You will recall that in August 2020, everyone employed in schools and settings across SBC took part in the introductory training. That was the beginning of the project to develop SBC into a nurturing authority. The project then progressed to deliver training on each of the 6 Nurture Principles. Most of you will have attended the first 2 of those training sessions. They looked at the importance of the school environment offering a safe base and at how we can see all behaviour as communication. This academic year we are looking at 2 more principles. Earlier this year we looked at Nurture Principle 6, exploring the importance of transition in the lives of young people. And today we are exploring Nurture Principle 1, which looks at the importance of understanding children and young people's learning and behaviour in terms of where they are developmentally. So we're just going to run through some training etiquette points before we begin today's session. First thing is that Scottish Borders Council really recognises the importance of nurturing approaches within our schools and are really committed to promoting nurture in all contexts. And today's training is one of the mandatory trainings and is important for all school and early years staff. So there is an expectation that participants will dedicate time to engage with this training fully. Training can take place in school staff groups, but the video is also available to all individuals in order to review or for new members of staff at any time. Do get in touch if you have any questions on any of the materials. You could speak to your school educational psychologist or inclusion and wellbeing staff at any time. For some of us, this topic might be quite difficult to think and talk about because there are examples of childhood neglect and trauma which can trigger strong thoughts and feelings, and so it is important that you are aware of your own reactions, and please feel free to take some time out if you need. We do encourage you to look after yourselves and to seek support should that be needed. And equally, please be sensitive to others' needs in this context. That is all part of being nurturing. And finally, please take this at your own pace. Most of you will be familiar with the Nurture Principles. Those are the principles that underlie a nurturing approach. But we'll just start with a quick reminder of them. So these principles are at the heart of how we want to be understanding and supporting our children and young people. We will be delivering training on 2 principles each year, and by the end of next academic year, the summer of 2024, they will all have been covered. The first principle is that children's learning is understood developmentally. Principle 2, the environment offers a safe base. 3, nurture is important for the development of well-being. 4, language is a vital means of communication. 5, all behaviour is communication. And 6, transition is important in children's lives. These 6 principles are individual principles, but they're also interlinked, and how we manage one will impact on the others. The principles are essentially about how we do things as an individual, at a school or setting level, as a community and as a local authority. And we need everyone to ooze nurture, to be nurturing and to develop a nurturing environment in everything that we do. So today we are going to think about Nurture Principle 1, that children's learning is understood developmentally. This is the first of the Nurture Principles, and arguably all of the other Nurture Principles lead on from this one. So now to the aims of today's session. We're going to think about fundamental needs for healthy development and what it might look like if these needs are not met. We will think about how to assess a child or young person's development, and consider practical ways of implementing this nurture principle in your school or setting. And we will consider the next steps for you as an individual and also for your school or setting. So the key theme of this principle is that everyone learns at a different pace and in a different way, and we need to accept children as they are rather than expecting them to fit into arbitrary expectations. Judging children's progress by their chronological age is problematic when there are a variety of factors which will impact on developmental trajectory. All children are individuals, and their unique journeys need to be recognised and respected. So what do we mean by development? What do we mean when we say that children's learning should be understood developmentally? Well, development refers to the processes through which the body, brain, abilities and behaviour of the infant, child and adult become more complex and continue to mature throughout life. Development involves cognition, memory, attention, language and communication, as well as feelings, relationships and sensory motor skills. And one domain very often influences the development of other domains, so it is important to consider the whole child at the centre of the many influences on development. So in terms of factors which influence child development, I find this a useful diagram from the organisation Birth to Five Matters. And even though it was from an organisation from Birth to Five, these factors continue to have an impact on children and young people throughout their development, not just up until the age of 5. These are all really important aspects to a developing child, and these are all crucial to a healthy development. So relationships again are central to a child's well-being and their learning, and adults will engage in what we call serve and return interactions back and forth between the child and this will help to support and extend the child's curiosity and learning and autonomy and self-regulation. So interactions are really crucial for a child to develop in healthy ways. Even if we just take self-regulation for an example, that's not something that a child can learn in isolation. It's something that requires an adult to draw alongside the child and to support their emotions and to help them to regulate. It's called co-regulation, and in doing so, over time, the child will then begin to adopt those strategies and be able to regulate more independently. But they require that interaction in order to develop. Children will thrive when they feel safe and valued and loved. And so in terms of emotional well-being, relationships are really key to that too. In terms of physical health and well-being, we know that children who are physically well and healthy are able to participate and join in lots of different life and learning experiences and gain the most benefit from these. And although development tends to follow predictable patterns overall, each child's journey is individual and is an individual winding pathway unique to that child. Children develop and learn through physical and mental engagement and challenges, and they have agency in all of that. So the extent to which children choose to be active in their learning will impact on how they develop. Children generally are made to be active in their learning. They seek the next stage in their development. They look to continue to develop. But there may be reasons why some children are more active in their journeys than others. experiences in the world, children's early experiences, will influence biological and neurological development and the ability to learn. And a sense of belonging and place in the community also provides a base for children's developing identity and enhances learning. So all of these factors will influence a child's development. So we've seen that there are many different factors that impact on a child's development. And we're going to just have a think more now about what children need from the adults around them to enable them to develop in healthy ways and to learn effectively. We're probably all quite familiar with different theories of human need, such as Maslow's hierarchy, such as Maya Kelmer-Pringle's work, and also in terms of learning specifically to do with Bloom's taxonomy. And so these are all different models and different theories around what people need to develop and to learn. And we're going to do a group activity now where we can think about fundamental needs of the growing child in more detail. So in your group, we'd like to invite you to discuss with others what you think children need for healthy development, and then also to consider what difficulties might you see children and young people experiencing if these needs are not met. You can feel free to put yourselves into groups for discussion, and we would estimate that this activity would take about 10 minutes. So we're now going to watch a brief video which highlights the importance of the interactions between children and their caregivers in building healthy brain foundations for development.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development.
So in terms of how a child develops, I find this a useful quote. It says, "Imagine a house with fragile foundations or soggy cement. The child's social, emotional and developmental age may differ to their chronological age." Again, that quote is just really showing the importance of those strong foundations, those building blocks that children need to be able to develop. Adoption UK have a framework called The Wall, where each brick in the wall represents a fundamental need. And without these bricks, the child's development will be impacted negatively. So here are some bricks that make up a healthy wall. This is a healthy wall that where all the bricks are complete. Now, these bricks could be damaged or loose or missing altogether when a child's development has been disrupted by experiences of trauma and loss such as abuse or neglect or bereavement, children may struggle to see others as safe and positive if their past relationships have been characterized by fear. They may be overwhelmed by their emotions if they have not experienced attuned, empathetic, and soothing responses. And they could be behaving in a way that guarantees they will be noticed after frequently feeling forgotten or overlooked. So for all of those reasons, it's really important for us to be aware of an individual child and what their wall might look like. So we're going to now just have a look at what the wall of a neglected or abused child might look like. So starting from birth, a child might not get the cuddles that they need. They may lack the stimulation that they need through interactions with others, and they may be given milk sporadically and inconsistently. They may have caregivers who are not attuned and responsive to their needs. And because of this, they might struggle to make friends. Their play may have been unsupervised. They may struggle to feel part of a family unit. They may play in an unhealthy way because it has never been modelled to them or because they have been abused. They may not receive encouragement or even believe the encouragement they do get. They may struggle to trust others. They might experience no or few boundaries on their behaviour, and this can cause problems at school and impact on their learning. They can fear being left alone. Even though their family may love them dearly, that expression of love might be infrequent or even unhealthy. So here we can see what the wall of a neglected or abused child might look like. Let's compare this again to the child who had all of their needs met. So we can really see the marked difference in the wall between a neglected or abused child and a child who has had all of these needs met. And it's not surprising that the neglected or abused child with all of these bricks in their wall missing or loose or damaged will have difficulties in terms of their development overall, especially their social and emotional development, but also their cognitive development and development in other ways. And this is precisely why we can't rely on a child's age to show where they should be developmentally. We need to look at their individual journeys and we need to look at their individual walls to be able to understand where they are developmentally. So just really exploring that idea in more detail now, the impact that trauma can have on a child's development is well researched and documented. A child may experience potential challenges with self-monitoring and with self-regulation, so they might find it much harder to understand their feelings and respond to those and to regulate their behaviours, because possibly they have never had an adult drawing alongside them, co-regulating with them and supporting them with that. Trauma may also increase a child's impulsivity and attention control and lead to other inconsequential behaviours. Trauma may impact on social, emotional and cognitive development. So we're talking about lots of different areas of development that can be impacted by trauma. This may be dependent on what age and stage the child is at when the trauma occurs. And trauma can also lead to difficulties with the child engaging with reward and sanction models of intervention. So, for example, if rewards are not achieved, then we as practitioners are in danger of reinforcing the child's negative representation of I'm bad or I am worthless, which makes these sorts of models of reward and sanction really problematic for children who have experienced trauma. We're now going to do another group activity, and we're going to have a think about what challenges there are within our education system for children and young people whose early needs have not been met consistently. Children and young people who have gaps in their wall. Our school system poses many challenges for these children and young people, and on the following slide we've got 2 case studies to consider, and what we would like you to do in your group is to think about these case studies and think about what aspects of school might be particularly challenging for these children. So case study 1 is Danny. Danny is a 6-year-old boy in primary 2. He lives with his mum and his older sister Amelia, who is 9. Danny's dad no longer lives with the family and has no contact. Danny has been witness to many incidents of domestic violence within the family home, perpetrated both by his dad and by a later partner of his mum. These incidents have been frightening and traumatic for the children. Danny has twice been accommodated temporarily with foster carers due to concerns over his safety at home. Danny's mum is now trying to rebuild her life and has gone back to college as well as working part-time to try to support the family. Money is tight and the family often don't have enough to eat. Danny's mum is frequently tired, and when she is home she finds it hard to spend quality time with the children. The children often stay up late playing on electronic devices until they fall asleep. Case study 2. Madison. Madison is a 13-year-old girl in S2. Madison lived with her mother until the age of 8, when she moved to live with her father due to her mother's alcohol dependency. During her early years, Madison was cared for inconsistently. When her mother was sober, she provided attuned and responsive care for Madison. However, when she was drinking, Madison was often left alone in her bedroom, unfed and with little interaction from others. At the age of 8, concerns about Madison's mother's ability to care for her peaked, and it was agreed voluntarily that Madison would move to live with her dad. Madison had not seen her dad for several years, and the move meant a change of town and of school. Despite this, Madison settled well with her dad, who appeared to work hard to support her. However, sadly, Madison's dad died very suddenly when she was 11 years old. Madison then moved back to live with her mother again, who was, by this stage, again in rehab. Madison is very concerned about her mother's health and struggling to cope following her father's death. So I hope it was useful to think about those case studies, and there will be children and young people in all of our schools with not dissimilar stories to these, and certainly with very similar themes. And Louise Bomber talks about this concept of the big ask being elements of the school day that are particularly challenging for children and young people, such as those we've just thought about. So Louise Bomber talks about these elements as being particularly big asks. So the first is separating from a parent or carer when arriving at school. Trusting adults to keep them safe and remember them. Sharing the attention of an adult with others. Coping with a wide range of sights, sounds, smells and other sensory inputs. Building friendships and balancing their desires with those of others. Managing conflicts and disagreements with friends. Attempting an unfamiliar task and taking the risk of making a mistake. Acknowledging when they need help and asking for it. and transitioning between different activities, classrooms, and adults. Of course, not all of these will necessarily be challenging for the young people that we discussed in our case studies, Danny and Madison. But many of these will be challenging, and many of these big asks will be challenging for other children and young people who have had gaps in their wall, who have not had their needs consistently met through childhood. So, children who have had adverse experiences or whose needs have not been consistently met, or who have experienced toxic levels of stress at home, may not have been able to fully develop what is called executive functioning skills. So we're now going to watch a short video to explain this further.
Ever wonder why some children are well organized and have an easier time adapting to change than others? It's a result of how certain skills develop in our brains at a young age. Scientists call these skills executive function and self-regulation, which can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead, cope with frustration, and follow lots of rules.
When executive functioning skills are working well, they're invisible. It's not like you see them in action because they enable children to be a good student, to be a good friend, to learn well. So they're just kind of hidden. It's really when they break down or when a child is really challenged by these capacities, hasn't had a chance to develop them very well, that you see problems.
Kids with well-developed executive function can deal with day-to-day worries, temptations, and obligations that pile up in their minds. They have the skills to regulate the flow of information and prioritize tasks. Executive function is one of the ways we manage stress and maintain an even keel, even as demands on our attention start to pile up. Kids who haven't developed strong executive function have a harder time directing mental traffic. Without the ability to prioritize, thoughts pile up and collisions occur, leading to frustration and anxiety.
First of all, we aren't born with executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are capacities that we learn. It's very important that children be in relatively predictable, unchaotic environments that are free of toxic stress, because when we are surrounded by chaos and disorganization, and especially if we're surrounded by fear and anxiety and a world that feels threatening, it's very hard for children to acquire these kinds of capacities.
Like most skills, good executive function depends on a strong brain foundation that develops in our earliest years of life. Caregivers can help by setting a good example with their own behavior, practicing serve and return interactions, and preventing toxic stress. As kids grow up through their preschool years and even into their teens, a stable, predictable environment will help them develop good executive function skills.
Executive functioning skills can be trained and taught. You do not have to give up on a child who has these problems. There are very sensitive periods during the ages from about 2 to 5 or 6, and again during adolescence, when these skills seem to be kind of growing by leaps and bounds. So you have a couple of opportunities, and ideally do both.
The human brain is an amazing thing. With practice, it can learn to pay attention, plan ahead, prioritize, and react to events as they unfold, just like the air traffic control tower at our busy airport. With help from the community, kids can learn the skills they need to thrive in a challenging world.
So here's a slide that just explains the spectrum of executive function. So these are some other examples of things that a child without a fully developed executive function may find problematic. So they may have difficulty regulating their attention, might find it hard to focus on a task. They may lack awareness of time and time management. Perhaps it's a child that's always turning up late for your class, or doesn't anticipate how long an activity will take them. They may have difficulty with planning and prioritizing, so setting goals for themselves or organizing the equipment and materials that they're going to need. They may have working memory difficulties, so even though you've just explained to them the steps that they need to do a task, they may really struggle to remember those and remember them in the correct sequence. They may have difficulties with metacognition, which is around thinking about their own thought processes, around problem solving and self-reflection. They may find it difficult to start tasks independently and to switch between tasks. Again, self-regulation was spoken about already, which is to do with regulating their thoughts, feelings and responses. And they may have difficulty adapting to change. So all of these are connected to executive function, and children, especially children who have experienced neglect or trauma, their development may have been impaired to the extent where they have not been able to fully develop their executive function, and they may experience some of the difficulties that we've just seen. So this is a nice quote here from Dr. Bruce Perry that says, "We intentionally stopped giving labels to individuals and started to create pictures of their developmental journey." And this is really important to in everything that we're talking about today, that it's not to do with looking at a child's chronological age and where they should be or they ought to be for that age, but it's instead looking at where they're at and how they've got there, what their journey has been like developmentally. So we're now going to think about assessing a child's development. Good assessment is important because we need to know where a child is at developmentally in order to be able to make sure that the learning activities are at the right level for them. And that's not just in terms of their cognitive abilities, it's also in terms of their social and emotional development. Good holistic assessment for an individual will identify areas of strength and progress, and will also identify areas of difficulty. It will indicate areas and methods for intervention, and may also possibly indicate other causal factors for which a different approach may be beneficial. So for example, it may highlight if there's any neurodevelopmental needs such as ADHD or autism that may require a different approach. It is essential to be non-judgmental when assessing a child's development. Suggesting that a child has not had their needs met or does not have a secure attachment with their parents has implicit blame, and this in itself can actually undermine the experience of nurture. So we need to be very careful in how we approach our assessment, and even when we have clear evidence that a child has been neglected or has not had their needs met, it's very important that we don't load judgment onto that situation, or we don't blame parents for that. We don't want to be at all judgmental, because that in itself can undermine what we're trying to do in terms of being nurturing and providing nurturing experiences. So finally, we do just need to take care in the analysis of the assessment data, and be careful what meaning we're interpreting from this. So when we are assessing a child's development, a good starting point for the assessment of well-being are the GIRFEC principles and the National Practice Model. The My World Triangle is the main tool used to gather information about the child or young person's whole world. It allows us to measure strengths and challenges in all parts of a child or young person's life and think about how to help. So when we're using the My World Triangle, we can think about questions such as, what are the strengths, talents and needs of this child or young person? What parts of the family relationships are helping the child or young person's development and well-being? How could the relationship between the child and the parent be strengthened? What other things are affecting the child or young person's development? And what can we do to help the parents to support the child or young person to do better? So another way of assessing a child's development is through observing them. It's through spending time with them and observing how they respond in different learning contexts. Helen Edwards emphasises the process of children's learning and said that rather than relying on assessments which give you arbitrary targets or age bands or tick box exercises, she really wants to encourage educators to make high quality observations of children and young people, and she has suggested some questions that might be useful to structure your observation. So to think about when, where and how does the child follow instructions? What do you see when they are listening? How do they talk and play with others? When and where are they most confident? How do they express their needs? What activities, resources and routines are calming for them? In what ways do they respond to change? And what do they like to do for themselves? And making these sorts of observations can be really helpful in having a holistic picture of where a child is at developmentally, and for you also to know how to intervene. So in terms of assessing social and emotional needs, there are tools such as the Boxall profile, which can be used, and as well as helping with assessment and observation of children, they can also provide a framework for planning interventions and then for measuring progress. They can be used for children whose behaviours can be quite complex, quite hard to understand. It can help to plan quite focused interventions and then to measure their effectiveness. And these tools can also help to refine teachers' observations and deepen their understanding of children's difficulties. However, just a word of caution with any sort of profile tool such as this, we need to not just take it in isolation, but to be aware that there are limitations of these profiles, and remember that your assessment is a bigger picture. You should never take the results of a profile on its own in isolation, but you need to consider your own observations and your own understanding of the child in different ways. So there is a book called Beyond the Boxall Profile, which is useful for monitoring and supporting the well-being of whole classes in mainstream school. And the developmental strands of the profile are quite reflective of the wall that we looked at earlier, and the resource can offer strategies and activities to help to repair those bricks in the wall that might be damaged or missing. So, as part of your assessment of a child's development, it is really important to know their individual story. Um, Proactive discussions with parents and carers are essential for understanding what significant events might be in the child's background. You might want to represent that on a visual timeline, so that you can see everything really that the child could be carrying on a day-to-day basis at school. Or similarly, an eco map is a way of charting supportive relationships that the child has both in and out of school, and that might be also very useful in planning interventions. Finally, it is really important when we're assessing a child's development that we elicit the voice of the child. It's really important to connect with their journey and to hear from them about their thoughts and feelings, and that will help us to understand the child better. There are also tools that we can use to be able to elicit the child's voice, things such as blob trees, for example. You might have seen where a child has to choose which blob on a tree they feel represents them and why. And doing activities like that can just help us to understand the child better. We can also use activities with them such as sentence completion activities where they're asked, for example, I feel happy, sad or scared when, or I am most proud of, or I wish people knew that. And that can also be a really useful tool in hearing the voice of the child. And we might want to think about, for specific children, creating an individual passport or an all about me resource that can be shared amongst multiple staff and people working with that child. And that sort of thing would outline what already works for the child, what they can do independently, what they find difficult, what sort of help that they would like. I know that these sort of things are being used in various different ways in different schools. And finally, when it comes to eliciting the voice of the child, we need to remember the nurture principle that says that all behaviour is communication, and we need to be always thinking about what it is that the child is trying to tell us. So moving on from how we assess a child's development to thinking about what does this nurture principle look like in practice. So practically, how can we make sure that we are understanding children's learning through a developmental lens, and what can we be doing to make sure that we are meeting the needs of children who have a whole range of different experiences in their lives and who developmentally might be at all different stages. These are the headings that we're going to look at in more detail. So the first are relational approaches, which, as we've said many times, are right at the very heart of nurture. We're also going to look at differentiation and personalisation within the curriculum to ensure that those developmental needs are met. And we will look at the promotion of health and well-being throughout the curriculum and opportunities for play. But first of all, another group activity where we're asking you to discuss with others in your group, what do you think this nurture principle looks like in practice? So we've just given you some broad headers to start you off, but it would be really good if you could discuss in your groups what does this nurture principle look like, either in your practice now or in terms of blue sky thinking. Where would you like to be? What would you like your classroom to look like in terms of this nurture principle? Again, if you could discuss that with one another and take about 10 minutes to do so. So in terms of what we can practically be doing to implement this nurture principle, we will start with the relational approaches. And as we know, good relationships are really at the heart of nurture. It's what nurture is all about, and it is the most important component in any school. The nurturing approach really emphasises the importance not just of good relationships, but great relationships and communication within each school and establishment. Good relationships are central to the health and well-being of all individuals. And research tells us that good relationships influence the positive development of both the structure and the function of areas of the brain associated with social and emotional learning. So for children whose developmental needs have not been consistently met, it is through positive relationships that they can be helped and they can be healed. So school staff really do have a key role in this. They're in a crucial position to be able to develop relationships with young people, to provide the emotional security that they need, and to bring about change. So to be able to mend and replace some of those missing or damaged bricks in the wall that we looked at earlier. For children with disrupted attachment histories or early relational trauma, the provision of an attachment figure in school can make all the difference. And therefore, having a key person for a child or young person who seems to have difficulty forming relationships can be beneficial. So we have a few quotes here that can just really help to exemplify what we've just been talking about relationships. So this one from David Howe says, if relationships are where things developmental can go wrong, then relationships are where they are most likely to be put right. And this one by Bruce Perry, about connectedness. It's the longer quote says, our major finding is that your history of relational health, so your connectedness to family, community and culture, is more predictive of your mental health than your history of adversity. This is similar to the findings of other researchers looking at the power of positive relationships on health. Connectedness has the power to counterbalance adversity. I think that's really massive in what we're looking at here, that actually long term, the connectedness that a child has to their family, to their community, to their culture, is a better predictor of their future mental health than their history of adversity, whatever that might look like. So this slide is really just an encouragement to you and a reminder that every interaction is an intervention. So rather than relying on specific programs of intervention, actually the relational approaches to developing positive relationships, how you interact day in, day out with the children that you work with, is an intervention if it is positive. So moving on now to think about differentiation within the curriculum in order to respond to individual developmental needs. The curriculum should be appropriately individualised to allow children and young people to have opportunities and experiences that they might have missed in their early life. So it should take into account that learners can have significantly different prior learning experiences which impact on their ability, for example, to focus and to settle to learn. Scottish Government guidance around applying nurturing approaches asks the following challenge questions in this area. It says, are children and young people given the opportunity to have soft starts and creative pauses that allow them to regroup and focus on learning? Are there opportunities for the curriculum to bridge the gap between missed home experiences? How well is the pace of the curriculum adapted to meet the needs of children and young people who require time to settle, to learn. Staff can use the positive relationships that they have with children and young people to help support them from a position of dependence to independence in a planned and gradual way. Both learning and emotional needs should be considered when moving through the curriculum. So even if a child appears to have established some learning skills, they may still require a level of emotional support and reassurance to allow them to fully demonstrate these skills. And adults working with children and young people need to find a balance so that they can give support when needed, but also to allow them to develop independence. So the curriculum should fit the child and the young person rather than the child and young person fitting the curriculum. So this should take into account the child and young person's emotional age as well as their ability within curricular areas. And a child or young person may have acquired necessary experiences and outcomes within the curriculum, but still need continued support due to emotional factors. And staff may need to find different ways of supporting social and emotional development at a level that also suits the chronological age of the child. So, for example, role play through drama for children and young people, or exploring feelings through literacy activities might be more suitable for older children and young people who have gaps in that area. It's important that the language used by the teachers in the classroom suits the developmental needs of the children and young people. So, for example, they may need instructions to be broken down, they may need their understanding to be checked, and staff may need to modify the language that they use depending on the children and young people's needs. And it's also important for children and young people to be given some level of choice about the mode of learning that they engage in. So, for example, if you're doing group work, it's important that children have some level of choice over how active they are or how passive they are within that group, how cooperative they are, or how much they work as an individual. And that will help their developmental progress, but will also help to increase the feeling of safety that the child experiences in the classroom, which is our nurture principle 2. So here are a few key themes to keep in mind when providing scaffolding for children with a range of developmental needs. So first thing is make learning specific. So when we give instructions or direction, we need to make sure that our language is clear and unambiguous. Some children might need bite-sized pieces of information and extra time to process what has been said before it is repeated. Visuals can be really helpful in both relaying information and allowing children to provide feedback. However, we also need to be mindful that visuals may be too abstract and carry little meaning for the child. So it's about trying to make learning as specific as possible. Making learning accessible. So we need to show what we mean, and we need to think out loud. We need to demonstrate what we expect to see and use concrete materials and references to make the skills more tangible. Thinking out loud can really help to mediate the experience. And you could start from your own perspective, for example, saying things such as, I'm doing this because, and the next thing I need to do is, and then provide similar prompts to scaffold the child's thinking. So then say, when or where have you seen something like this before? Or how is this similar or different to? And what do you need to do first? Making learning manageable. Activities can be broken down into small steps, and and the use of a schedule or a checklist to show the number and the order of tasks can be helpful. It's important to set realistic and achievable goals to work towards and adjust the level of challenge so that the child feels motivated to participate and satisfied by the process. And we should proactively build in sensory breaks to help support emotional regulation over the course of the day. Make learning regulating. Sometimes a request of a child can be perceived as a stressful demand, and we can mitigate this by using more indirect language, such as "I wonder how we can," or "let's try to." Offering choices of what to do can also enable the child to feel kept in mind and offer some degree of control within an adult-led activity. And it's also important to normalise mistakes as learning opportunities. And this is more powerful when we notice our own mistakes and we convey to the children and young people that practice allows us to understand different and better ways of doing things. So another way of ensuring that we are acknowledging this nurture principle is through promoting health and well-being across the curriculum. Health and well-being aspects should be incorporated throughout all of what the child is doing. So, for example, in a literacy lesson, children and young people can be encouraged to discuss or to work together in ways that help them to develop social and emotional skills. Holistic assessment information should be made available to all teachers for all classes. So all teaching staff should be aware of the level that a child is working at in terms of their health and well-being, as well as other areas of the curriculum such as their literacy and numeracy. And there should be explicit teaching of social and emotional skills within the classroom according to the stage and the developmental needs of the children and young people. So, for example, things such as turn taking and negotiating are skills which may need to be explicitly taught within the classroom. So as we've already touched upon, opportunities for play are an important factor in this nurture principle. We know that play is important for healthy development. Play helps children to develop cognitively, physically, socially, and emotionally. And if children have missed out on play opportunities in early life, they may need additional opportunities for play in later life. Play can be described as an activity that is freely chosen and directed by the participants. So it's something that is child-led and managed. The activity is chosen by the children for its own self. So the activity is chosen for the enjoyment in that activity and not for the sake of any other outcomes or ends. It should require the minimal of adult intervention. However, it is important to say that the adult does have an important role, especially if children have not had play opportunities. They will likely need adults to be able to support and model how to play to help scaffold these experiences. Hopefully, once the culture of play has been established, the adult's role can be gradually lessened, but it is really important to recognise that we can't just expect children to be able to engage in completely free play if that is something that they have not been exposed to and had experiences of. There should be opportunities for play-based learning in schools as much as possible, dependent on the developmental level of the children and young people. And again, this is something that needs to match on to their chronological age as well. So we, for older young people, it will be a case of trying to find ways of nurturing play in an age-appropriate way. So Early years may be an emphasis on imaginative play, but for older children and young people, this might involve role play or drama or games. All mainstream primary classrooms should aim to have areas available for play and relaxation. So in infant classes, these could include your sand and your water trays and these sorts of things. Role play areas in the upper school, and facilities like a board game corner or resources for drawing or modelling, and comfy seated areas for reading and chatting are all good ideas. Puppets have long been an important part of the nurture approach, and can be used in role play situations and help children to see what they can do in certain situations, and appropriate behaviour can be modelled to children in a fun and non-threatening way through puppets. The use of a character can also help externalise the problem from being one of the child to being one of the puppets. So puppets which have lifelike features and different expressions can be really helpful, but a variety of resources can be used for role playing, and they could also be used in small groups or during circle time. Talking about play, it's really important also to think about secondary age children, because secondary age children still need opportunities for play. Their play, the nature of their play might look very different from the play of younger primary and nursery age children. However, they still require opportunities to freely choose activities, to lead and manage activities that are chosen not for the sake of other outcomes or ends, but for the sake of the enjoyment in that activity in itself. Research done by Inspiring Scotland looked at play within secondary schools and showed that pupils who have positive play experiences at school benefit from increased physical and mental health. So just as we come to the end of the session today, we want to just revisit these aims. So we thought about fundamental needs for healthy development, and we thought about what it might look like if these needs were not met. We thought about different ways of assessing development, and we considered practical ways of implementing the nurture principle. So the final thing to do is to consider next steps for your school or setting. So, given everything that we have thought about today, what changes are important for your school or establishment? What might you try differently as an individual practitioner? And what is the next step you want to take? So that is the end of today's presentation, and all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening and for your enthusiasm. And if there are any questions that anybody has, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and you can speak to your school educational psychologist or the Inclusion and Wellbeing team at any time.